Hey guys and girls, hope you're all okay. Board now back with Rachel McDonald, and thanks for joining us on this special video. And that's because we're returning to our sort of monthly top 10 list. Now, we haven't done one for a while. Obviously, our first one was in October, which was top 10 horror villains. No spoilers, but you can check that out on the channel now. We had a lot of fun doing that one because there were quite a few over that, but then a few that were different and some diverse choices. And it was a fun back and forth chat that we had. Probably one of our best videos so far. So I hope if you haven't seen that and check it out, that you enjoy that. The plan is, as much as we can do, obviously, you know, to try and make this a regular monthly thing. So we're going to alternate between, you know, TV and film. So now we're on to TV, and I think this is one I put up for a poll on the channel, on the community tab, and you guys came back or maybe I came up with this one. I think I came up with this one actually, but I'll stop rambling now and just say, obviously, you're here to see us talk about the top TV pilots. Obviously, our own personal list. This may be even more surprising than the horror list because we're sort of convinced that maybe there'll be one or two that we have the same, but then outside of that, probably we're unlikely to have that much crossover. But before we start, if you just want to say maybe what you look for in a good TV pilot in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Oh, before I start, little fun fact. I don't know if you know this, but I recently found out that apparently the reason that the first episode is called the pilot is because it's the first time that the show is on air.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know exactly. I thought it was something to do with that. I thought they were using some sort of metaphor of trying to fly in a way, like trying to get the show off the ground, sort of, which really
so that's it. So when it comes to pilots, I like a pilot that establishes three things. I like a pilot that will establish your characters so that you have an idea of the main characters that you're going forward with, that will establish the themes for the show, and that usually has a bit of a hook so that you're going to come back. So I like a pilot that does all three of those things. I don't necessarily need the big storyline or the big picture yet, but I want to get a handle on the characters and their dynamics, what the themes of the show are going forward, and if it's got some sort of hook that will keep me watching. I obviously want an episode that is a good episode in general, obviously that's well paced and, you know, doesn't feel like they're trying to cram too much in, but I also need to make sure that it's not too slow, because I do find often with pilots, especially if they're pilots that have been filmed ahead of the show. You know, often they'll film a pilot to get the show off the ground. So things will be a little bit different, maybe a little bit weird. You know, the dialogue might be a bit slower. The characters might not be established. Sometimes shows will go back and reshoot the pilot. You know, you have shows like Buffy that has the unaired pilot, but sometimes they'll just use the episode that they filmed, and it can be a little bit jarring because things will be different. You'll be able to spot the differences. So like I said, establish character, themes, and give us a good hook to keep watching, and give us an idea of what the show's going to be like going forward. What about you? What do you look for in a pilot?
I think similar. I think I like it to feel like a complete kind of story. I mean, obviously have a hook at the end sort of thing, or something where you can come back to it. But you know, I think because it's the introduction to the show, I like to have a bit of intrigue sort of thing, or question marks, or just a general sense of what might happen or what's going to happen. But the most important thing, I think, is to set up the characters and get a sense for the universe. And characters, I think, especially in the first episode, are I think really, I mean, obviously over the course of shows and stuff, they probably become even more important. You know, I think obviously if you're not quite sure about them in the first show, first episode, or they're a little bit weak, it's probably not like a deal breaker. But I think obviously if you do enjoy the characters in that first episode, it can be quite a good icebreaker, before you see where the plot's really going. I guess it can be quite a nice way into the show, and you know, these are encouraging signs that things can progress.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rachel, you can kick us off. What's your number 10?
Number 10. All right. So at number 10, I have the Veronica Mars pilot. So the Veronica Mars series was a bit of a mixed bag, but when the first season came along, I remember I watched the pilot when it aired. And I watched the extended pilot. They actually aired the extended pilot here in Australia, which was really odd. So it was a little bit different to the pilot that was aired in America. But I remember being hooked right from the beginning. So for those who are not in the know, I mean, you probably do know Veronica Mars, but it was a kind of a teen detective show, a very noir show. So this one was very, very grey. And I thought that the pilot set this up perfectly. We started with Veronica at a sleazy hotel taking pictures, so we were instantly in the mood. You know, we knew that this was a detective show. We knew that we were dealing with a very savvy teen detective. It was a very good use of voiceover. I find sometimes voiceover can be distracting, but Kristen Bell has not only the perfect voice for voiceovers, but she knows how to utilize it very well. And we get this beautiful first episode where we get a whole kind of mishmash between the present and the past. So we get to find exactly how Veronica got to the point where she is and why she is the character that she is. Kristen Bell is fantastic. The establishment of her character is amazing. Reminded me a little bit of Buffy. You know, you see this tiny little blonde girl who looks very, you know, harmless, and she's just a complete badass. We get a great establishing moment where she goes to school and she sees the person who will become her best friend, Wallace, tied to a pole. And while everyone is standing around and laughing at him, she takes out a knife and cuts him down. Again, establishing the fact that even though she looks really hardened, she's actually a really good person. We get a great establishing scene with her father. We get to meet Keith Mars, who is one of the best TV dads in existence.
That's what I was going to say, yeah, definitely.
Yep. He's fantastic. And then, of course, we get the flashbacks to the hook of the series, which is kind of a Twin Peaks-esque type thing. We have the murder of her best friend, Lily Kane, who was the daughter of a very, very prominent businessman. So we get all this beautiful setup in the first episode alone, where we get to establish Veronica's character, we get to establish the mystery. The flashbacks are shot with this beautiful kind of blur to the camera, so it always establishes when we're in the past and when we're in the present. We get to establish characters like Logan and Duncan, both of who would become her love interest, Wallace, her best friend. There's a great confrontation towards the end of the episode between Logan and Veronica, which sets up the tension in their relationship and the kind of back and forth banter that will eventually lead into their romance. And then we get the hook at the end when Veronica discovers that the people that she's looking at in the hotel are her very own mother and the father of her best friend. So it gives you that great hook at the end that kind of leads into the rest of the series. The music's great. The theme song is great. The atmosphere is fantastic. And I also think it's a really well-directed episode. Like, it's sharp and the direction is clean and simple and it doesn't have any bells or whistles. You get the establishment of the police in town when you find out that Veronica suffered a sexual assault and they ignored her. So right from the beginning, you have all the setup for this beautiful film noir, you know, type series. You have the corrupt cops, you have the gritty detectives, you have the best friend. I love that Wallace is kind of presented as a gender flipped His Girl Friday. And it's just a fantastic establishing episode that leads into the really strong first season of the show. The rest of the seasons are up for debate, but that first season and that first episode for me are fantastic. And so Veronica Mars is number 10 on my list.
It's a really good choice. It's a great pilot. I agree with, everything you said. And one of the credits to it, when you look at it over the season and obviously beyond that season, is then actually that they do make me engage with Logan, because when I saw those early episodes, I thought this guy's going to be really hard to like. Obviously, I was into Veronica Mars, her drama, the stuff with the father, everything else, and I definitely liked the balance of like the cynical tone and how very grounded it was, and a lot of realism, but also obviously those moments of black comedy and humor as well, which definitely gave it the right balance. But yeah, for a while I thought I'm really going to struggle to like Duncan as well in a way,
Duncan
but
as well, yes.
especially Logan. But over time I definitely at least became invested in it. I mean, it's probably a show for us to do one day. I think that
I
would
think
be
so.
great discussions. Personally, I'll just, without saying too much, I'll just say screw the haters on the 4th season, because I mean that just baffled me. I wasn't sure what they were expecting or what they were watching, to be honest. But
that'll be interesting when we get to that, because I have some issues with the 4th season.
Okay,
so
okay.
yeah.
Anyway, that's a discussion for another day.
For another time.
I'll get on to my number 10.
Alright.
Okay, my number 10, and I don't know if this will surprise you or not, but my number 10 is the Desperate Housewives pilot,
Very nice.
which is just called Pilot. But
Yes, unfortunately.
yeah, well, a lot of them are. Some of
They
mine
are.
do have titles, which is a bit more interesting. Yeah, I think this is a similar thing where they obviously make it very cinematic, where they're playing on like what is kind of looks like in many ways a standard sort of network style soap, melodrama, all the rest. But like especially in that first episode, and I think the first season, they do establish this really stylish sort of color palette where it does look like a film a lot of times. That, you know, the way they capture the colors in the neighborhood and some of the camera movements and stuff, they do make it look like a classic like Hollywood style melodrama, like a Douglas Silk sort of film, or like a murder mystery. Like that first season, like the arc of it and the whole mystery, it does become like a classic slow burning like murder mystery type thing, and it really keeps you engrossed. But then I love the balance of that and then the more quirky stuff going on. And there's good examples of that in the pilot. You know, for example, I really like the scene where Gabrielle tries to cover up for her lover, John, the one she's having the affair with, by
the
random
lawnmower.
Yeah, leaving a rich party and going back to cover his tracks on the grass, you
Yes.
know, by actually mowing the lawn. I mean, that's an absolutely brilliant scene. It's one of those scenes where if you see it on paper, like in a way it shouldn't really work, but it just does. It's like the perfectly quirky scene. Also, like the ending of the episode with Susan and the fire, I really like the subversion of that, where it I mean, I won't really say the twist just because, you know, if you haven't seen it, people, but I like the way it sets you up to think one thing's going to happen and then actually there's a twist. So I think at times Desperate Housewives, especially in the pilot, does subvert your expectations. And it's obviously worth saying it's a darker show than you would imagine, especially in that. Probably the first 2 seasons. I mean, after that, maybe not so much, but especially the first 2 seasons, at times, it's pretty dark. I mean, obviously, Brenda Strong, her character, is narrating from the grave, essentially, and that's a great device in itself. And again, a lot of influence from, like, Lynch and stuff. But just the whole mystery for the first season, combined with the antics of the girls, it's like, they cast it so well, and it's just the right level of like sort of farcical, but also with those more gripping style moments as well. So just the back and forth, some great twists and turns, as I said, especially in the early season. I think it's a really strong pilot. I've seen it a couple of times now, and it definitely sets the tone for the show, sets a good like mystery off, which becomes, I think, really satisfying in that first season.
Well, that's actually kind of perfect, because I'm going to go into my number 9, which is the Desperate Housewives pilot.
No way.
So there's our first crossover. I agree with everything you've said. The pilot is brilliant. I think sometimes pilots have a challenge with setting up characters and exposition in a way that feels natural, and they have to kind of get all their information across in a way that doesn't feel like they're info dumping you. And I think that by having the characters introduced at the wake, one by one, with the types of food they brought and how they relate the food back to their characters, like they say Susan brought a macaroni and cheese, which is, she doesn't know how to cook, and she's like that it was too salty on the night that she found lipstick on her husband's shirt. dessert. It was too, sour on the night that her
Yeah.
husband left. She burnt it on the night that she got served her divorce papers, or Brie bringing her homemade rolls and her homemade muffins. And they talk about how, she's perfect to everyone except her family. And I just thought that the way they establish each of the characters is just so perfect. Like you said, there's some great moments of comedy. The lawnmower scene is hilarious. And it's become such an iconic scene within the series. Like when people think of Desperate Housewives, they think of that lawnmower scene. I think that it establishes the girls, I say girls, the women and their families really well. I think it shows the drama side of things. You see that Bree's marriage is breaking down. You see that Lynette's marriage is on the rocks and Gabby's, and you get the establishment of all these different dynamics. And I think that the ending of the pilot is so perfect when they find the bribery note. I know what you did. It makes me sick. I'm going to tell. And they just, all four of them stand there and they're just like, oh, Mary, Alice, what did you do? I like what you said about the colors and the way it looks cinematic, because it really does. And I think that color palette and the fact that it's so bright and it's so shiny and it looks so perfect is that perfect facade but beneath the surface, there's all this ugliness that lies under that facade. And I think that you really see that in the pilot episode. I think it establishes that beautiful black humor that runs throughout the entire series, where you find yourself laughing at parts that you're thinking, oh, this is not appropriate. I should not be laughing at this, but it's just so funny. And I just think that it's just such a great pilot. It's just got everything you want, and it establishes the tone and the characters and the dynamics so perfectly. So that is my number 9, the Desperate Housewives pilot. So there's our first bit of crossover.
Yeah, and I think also I'll just say that Marcia Cross is so underrated. I mean,
I know, right? Brie is my favorite. She has always been my favorite, and I love Marcia Cross. Oh, I loved her from Melrose Place,
Me
and so
too.
seeing her on, right? She is amazing. So yes, shout out to her.
Yeah, and I think the thing to say about that is obviously, in general, when you watch things like this, soaps and what have you, often the standard of acting isn't the best. But I think that's what makes her even more impressive, is that because she does raise the bar. I mean, as like Kimberly in Melrose, she really is. She's so convincing and so scary, but
she really is.
Brings a lot of emotion and depth to it as well. And similar with this, Okay, so on to my number 9, which is a bit of classic sitcom here at number 9, and it's the Cheers pilot, which does have a title. It's Give Me a Ring Sometimes. So the very first episode from nearly 40 years ago, believe it or not. I think it is about 40. I mean, people forget how old that show is. It started in the early 80s. And one thing I'll say before I talk a bit about it is, I think when I watch a lot of the early seasons from my favourite sitcoms, or like the pilot episodes, a lot of times they're not really the best, and it takes a while for the show to find its feet. So like the Seinfeld pilot isn't very good. The Parks and Recreation pilot isn't that great. It feels quite too similar to The Office, like they're just doing another Office. So it does happen a lot that way when I'm not so keen on like the pilot episodes. But Cheers, I think, really hits the ground running. I mean, obviously, this is an interesting one because this is an example where we now speak about modern shows being more cinematic than ever and more money going into them, the direction. But, Cheers is one of those shows where I think for an 80s, 90s sitcom, it actually, the direction is actually quite cinematic at times, or at least it's dramatic. I think, obviously, you have the classic device of the bar, and the fact that the way it's shot and captured, and the sort of tracking shots as we see the different characters. It's almost like a stage in itself. So it has that very, physical theatre type feel, which is obviously what they were going for. So, for example, in the pilot, you get that opening sort of tracking shot where, like, Sam walking into the bar, and you've got the music going, and then the camera sort of follows him, and that's literally the way it opens, and that's just great. I mean, that's in itself is different for a sitcom to open like that, to have that sort of direction from the start. From there, that pilot really does a great job in setting up some of the things the show is going to be about, some of the interactions. I love the way they work Diane into it and her whole thing with her, you know, sort of would-be husband, sort of a rich sort of professor who then, as things develop slowly, it becomes clear to her that he's not going to come back, that he's gone back to his old wife. And well, yeah, that's the thing. Cheers has a lot of heart. That's partly what I love about it, is that it's not just about the comedy. It's about human beings, and there is definitely a heart to it. And watching her in that first episode, you really feel for her. But it obviously does a really good job of setting up the dynamic between her and Sam, the love-hate type dynamic where they can't stand each other, but they're so sort of turned on by each other. And you get that old classic thing of he has weaknesses, but so do her, and somehow they make for quite the couple, that kind of thing. So it's like his strengths appeal to her and vice versa. So like their strengths are different. So it's the fact that they are different then is almost the appeal, even though in theory and people watch them in the bar, it's like, yeah, this won't work because you basically, you are polar opposites. You seem to hate each other. But that's sort of why, at least for a while, it does work. But it's very obviously off and on. And I think it was one of the early sitcoms to really do that sort of thing. Diane was, I think, a really ahead of her time character for a female on a TV show, on a sitcom especially, but probably TV in general. I think she influenced a lot of people later. A really strong pilot. Again, I think Cheers is one where it was a bit of a slow build, where it sort of only got better over time. But for a first episode, I think that's a really strong like pilot episode. So that's Cheers at number 9. Give me a call sometime.
Well, I have to admit, Cheers is not a sitcom that I've actually seen a lot of. It because it aired in the 80s and I was born in the 80s, so I was a bit too young. And I don't remember it having a lot of reruns, because that's how I watched a lot of old sitcoms growing up, was reruns. I mean, I've seen bits and pieces here and there. I've seen enough to know, about Sam and Diane's back and forth, and to know the theme song, and to know the general premise. Yeah. But I've never actually sat down and watched the show. But now that you say it's got such a good pilot, I think I will have to give it a go. So might see if it's on any streaming services and see what all the fuss is about.
I mean, that's obviously reminding, because obviously they do have the theme in that opening episode, and it is one of the great themes, and so that's definitely a top 10 list we'll do as well. Top 10 themes, because so many good TV themes over the years. So that definitely.
So coming in at my number 8 is the pilot to True Calling. Now, for anyone who doesn't remember, True Calling was a very short-lived Eliza Dushku series in the early 2000s. She did this series instead of the Faith series. And the basic premise is she plays a medical student called True Davies who ends up getting a job in a morgue, and it turns out that she can talk to the dead. Kind of. Basically, what happens is any kind of unnatural death, murder, suicide, tragic accident, people have the option to ask her for help. And when they do, her day rewinds and she gets the chance to save them. So the pilot episode establishes this. It actually opens at True's mother's funeral. True's mother died when she was younger, and you find out that she was actually murdered. She has a very strange relationship with her siblings because of this, and she's estranged from her father. So the episode opens with the funeral, and you see little True talking to her mother's corpse. And this is your first indication that something is not quite right with this chick, because, you're not really supposed to be able to talk to your mother's corpse at her funeral. Then we go to older True graduating and getting the job at the morgue before she starts medical school. We meet the character of Davis, who's played by Zach Galifianakis, in a role that is completely different to anything that you would expect from him. This was his pre-hangover days. True spends her first night at the morgue. There's a beautiful tense scene where she hears the voice whispering her name, and she goes slowly into the morgue, and she opens the door, and the corpse turns to her and says, "Help me," which becomes a big theme and is actually worked into the theme song. And she relives her first day. And of course, you get all the confusion that comes with True as to what the hell is going on. Why is she reliving the same day? Why are things happening this way? But then you start to see the advantages to her reliving the day, because it's not just about helping the person who died. In this episode, you see that she gets to help her brother avoid getting beaten up by loan sharks. She gets to help her sister not put cocaine in her nose because her sister's now a drug addict. And it kind of turns into a bit of a murder mystery because she has to unfold where this victim came from, what's going on in her life, why did she, the first victim is a suicide victim, why did she commit suicide, all of these things. And I think that the pilot episode is really fast-paced, it's really fun, it shows Eliza is actually got a very good handle on the role already, like she's already settled into the role and is making True a really interesting character. You get to establish her family dynamics, her dynamics with her best friend, and it's just a really fun, really entertaining pilot. And I remember when True Calling first aired, I was very excited about it because Buffy had just finished and I needed something to fill the void that was left behind by Buffy. So the fact that I got a vehicle starring Eliza Dushku, and Faith was one of my favorite characters, I was very excited for the series anyway. But I remember when I watched the pilot, I was completely sucked in by the premise and completely sucked in by the fast pace of the pilot, by the excitement, and by the fact that True got to save this girl. Now, the show became really good. Like, it started to bring in new elements. There was a character called Jack who was introduced later on, played by Jason Priestley, who was really fantastic. In the second season, we started to get more variations on the save me. A lot of the time, True would realize that the save me, the help me didn't always necessarily mean save me. She would have different cases. And a lot of the time it would feel a bit like you were watching like a murder mystery, but with a fun little twist on it. Unfortunately, the show was cancelled, only 6 episodes into season 2. So we never really got a good resolution. There was a writer on the show who has since released information on where the show would have gone and the storylines that they wanted to do. And it is such a pity that they didn't get to do it, because where they decided to take the show was very cool. And I am so disappointed that we didn't get to see the show develop into what it could have become. So it's a real pity that the show got cut short, but the pilot is, for me, it's a standout. I think it does everything a pilot's supposed to do. I think it's fun. I think it's frenetic. I mean, it's not the most sophisticated or, highbrow kind of entertainment, but it's for what it was, which was a genre show, an entertaining genre show. I think the pilot really did well. So that's my number 8 is the True Calling pilot.
I agree with that. I mean, I think for a while, like the early episodes, I sort of thought similar. It was kind of standard stuff, and I was enjoying it enough. But it's only as you go through it a bit more and they really develop and look into the themes and do more different things with the premise and obviously grow the characters. And I remember watching that like final episode they did in 6 and just getting so frustrated by how it ended, because it was so annoying because they didn't tie it up or give a satisfying ending at all. And and it's that sort of thing where, like, consciously, because I knew it was the last episode, and like as it was coming towards the end, and I was looking, well, what are they gonna do? Are they gonna tie this up or not? It didn't really look like it. It was a fun show and a good premise. That's sort of key. My number 8, and I'm actually going back to the 80s again for this one, and it's the Miami Vice pilot, which we watched this once on the stream. I've only seen it once, actually. I mean, it maybe if I'd seen it at least once more, it might be even higher. But and again, there's a title, Brother's Keeper. So maybe with some early TV, they did actually give them titles more. But Brother's Keeper is the name. Obviously, many people will know it's how Michael Mann got his start, really. His big break. He obviously went on to do some really great films, Last of the Mohicans, The Insider, Heat. bunch of stuff. So really famous director now. Obviously, Manhunter was a big calling card originally in the 80s, but yeah, he worked on Miami Vice originally. That's sort of how he got his first big break. It's one of these, I mean, even people who have never seen an episode or don't know much about the show will know that it's a classic buddy cop style take on it, and it's set in Miami. You've got Crockett and Tubbs, obviously Don Johnson, a massive star during the 80s, early 90s. He's obviously, you know, the guy who plays Crockett. The pilot really surprised me. I hadn't seen it before, like I said. It surprised me just how much was going on. Now, not surprisingly, with a Michael Mann thing, I think it is very well directed. There's some exciting action scenes, but action scenes that are done in a way where you can follow them and it doesn't get too, you know, confusing or over the top. Good visuals, really crisp, bright colours. I think you can see maybe how something like Dexter might have been inspired by Miami Vice. The thing with the plot of the pilot is then it actually starts with Crockett with an original partner, like he has a different partner at the start of that pilot, actually played by Jimmy Smits, who's obviously a really good actor. He's actually the one who plays like Crockett's partner, but there's obviously they're on a drug type deal, like a stakeout type thing, undercover type sting type thing, and his car explodes, he gets killed quite early in the pilot. So then you get a slow burn to essentially you see the two different stories. And this is one of the good things about actually a lot of early TV pilots is then they tended to give them pretty much a feature length running time for the first pilot to really give them time to establish things. So you really get a full meal, so to speak, a full story across this episode. A really nice slow burn to Crockett and Tubbs getting together. It's not just like a rush thing, which might happen sometimes, just because they have to get them together before the end of the episode sort of thing to set up the show. But because it's like pretty much, as I said, feature length, and you do get a satisfying slow burn to them. You get like their different stories. Also, like the Crockett character is like going through a divorce, so you've got stuff going on in his personal life, and so it actually surprised me how many different things was going on. That you did have this other stuff going on where it was quite gritty at times, and I mean, obviously, you know, racial depictions and stuff of like black characters. They've come a long way on TV over the years, but considering this was back in the 80s, I would say, like, just watching like the Tubbs character in this first, it's pretty good, you know, for the era and stuff. It's not like wildly like stereotypical or offensive, I wouldn't say, and it's a good pilot. You know, it's quite meaty, as I said, quite gritty, quite stylish. And it sets up the characters really well. There's obviously a little bit of humour and quirky moments. So I was surprised how much I liked this. So I'm definitely going to go back and watch more at some point. But that's Miami Vice, Brother's Keeper, the pilot.
Okay. Another one I have not seen. Have not seen any of Miami Vice. I mean, I know the names, the Crockett and Tubbs. I'm like, yeah, obviously I've heard of those and I've heard of Miami Vice. So that might have to be another one that I'll have to put on my list and check out and see if it's everything you've claimed it is. So you're giving me some good stuff to watch if I'm getting bored this week. I'll be like, do some 80s stuff. Maybe I'll come around to your way of thinking about the 80s. Don't think so, but maybe. So you're giving me some good stuff.
Well, I did say films, to be fair, more than TV, but obviously there are some gems to be found on TV then as well. So.
All right, cool. So moving into my number 7. At number 7 for me is the Alias pilot, which does actually have a name. It is Truth Be Told. So Alias is a show that I adore, done by the same guy who brought us Lost. So it has that same sort of frenetic energy. Jennifer Garner is fantastic in the lead role. And the pilot is a very, very fun fast-paced adventure that really sucks you in from the beginning. It has the iconic red hair that everyone associates with Alias, and it opens with, it's one of those kind of flashback pilots. So it opens with Sydney Bristow being tortured. We don't know what's going on. Some guy's got her in a basement and is pulling her teeth out. Right then and there, you know that you're in for an intense experience. And then again, we have use of a voiceover, which again, I think is employed well because we do need to get this information. And you find out Sydney's past. So you find out that she was recruited to this company called SD6, which is, she informs us, a branch of the CIA, a covert branch of the CIA. And we get introduced to her father, who she's estranged with, played wonderfully by Victor Garber. This is one of my, it's one of my favorite roles of his. We meet the director of SD6, Arvin Sloan, who is one of my favorite characters, one of my favorite, well, spoilers, but one of my favorite bad guys. And we meet her boyfriend who has just proposed to her. So the premise of this is she's wrestling with whether or not she tells her boyfriend, or now her fiance, that she's part of the CIA. And this is where we get the ball rolling, because she ends up telling him. He leaves a voicemail on her answering machine when she's on a mission, and they kill him. Now, this is where you start to go, hang on, I know the CIA is covert, but do they really kill people? And this is where Sydney gets the horrifying realization that she's actually working for the enemy, that SD6 is not a covert branch of the CIA, it is a terrorist cell. And this is where we get the setup of Alias, which is that Sydney defects. She goes to the FBI, which is the final shot in the series. She walks into the FBI and she decides to play both sides. Now, I think that this pilot has everything you want in a spy pilot. It's got some great action sequences. It's got some great spy sequences. We see Sydney, you know, take on different aliases, so to speak. And I actually once watched this video on YouTube, which was an ex-CIA agent reviewing different disguises. And she said that the disguise that Sydney wears to the airport, the red hair that everyone knows, and the scene plays out. She said, this scene is so good, we could use this to teach spy espionage, because Sydney Bristow doesn't just put on the makeup, she adopts the entire persona. She plays this beautiful game of misdirection with the flight attendant when she's checking her passport. You get to see how badass Sydney is. I mean, Sydney Bristow, one of the best female action characters on TV. Jennifer Garner is brilliant in the role. And we get the reveal that her father is also a double agent. It's like, it's a pilot episode. You don't even know that much about these characters or about this setting, and you're still getting these brilliant revelations and these brilliant reveals and twists and turns. And this is all in the first 40 minutes of the show. Now, Alias went on to be a pretty crazy series. There was a lot of weird stuff that went on in this series, a lot of twists and turns. It's one of those shows that you cannot, you know, just kind of put it on in the background. You have to sit down and pay attention, because there are so many different levels and different bad guys and different missions. And I think that the pilot episode establishes that so well. And it just lets you know that you're in for this complete roller coaster of a ride. It's just one of those pilots that just grabs you from the opening episode, from the opening scene, and you're just hooked for the entire ride, because you just want to know what's going on, what's going to be revealed now, what twist is coming up here. So that's my number 7, the Alias pilot, truth be told.
Yeah, a lot of that I still need to see, because I've still only seen like 10 episodes of Alias.
Oh, okay.
I definitely enjoy what I've seen so far, and it's a good pilot, especially when you get those twists about halfway through and things change. That's when it really goes up a level as a pilot. So yeah, no, good stuff. I mean, Jennifer Garner's never been better, and I agree, all the stuff with the different looks and the different outfits and the level of detail from what I've seen is brilliant. And obviously, as you said, a really strong supporting cast. There's some great character actors in there, so exciting stuff, exciting show. So that's your number 7, wasn't it?
Number 7?
Okay, my number 7, something I've already mentioned, but it's the XFiles, the pilot. And so probably for people who know me, no surprise this is on here. And I think, to be honest, part of it is just how iconic it is and how memorable. I think you can always argue that, maybe it shouldn't be on there, or is it that great? But a lot of it is nostalgic because I grew up on it. But over the years, when I've rewatched it, I think it does actually hold up really well. And it definitely ticks a lot of the boxes, which we mentioned earlier about what a good pilot should be. I think what's really impressive about the X-Files pilot is that it does set up a fair bit of mythology, which then comes into it in like much later episodes and seasons. So, I mean, you can see the vision quite early on. This is the one I was hinting at when I said, the two leads, which obviously one of the most famous partnerships ever on TV, probably in pop culture in general. But Mulder and Scully, Gillian Anderson, David Duchovny, they have that chemistry from the very start. And it's very rare that happens. I mean, normally you develop it over time and things come together. But to have it from the very start and to have those characters pretty much there on the page from the very start. Obviously, the first season of X-Files is sort of very up and down, and it takes a little bit of time to really come into its own. But there's no doubt in how good those two characters were from the start. Again, some good intrigue at the FBI with the hires up, and you get some good mystery in the scenes with those characters. Who can you trust? Who can't you trust? Who's just a bit of a pencil pusher, just doing his job, but he might be harmless, but who is potentially more dangerous? Obviously, there's a particular character that probably fits into that category who's in the pilot. The show in many ways wouldn't be the same without him. Again, it looks very good, the visuals of it, considering it is like an early 90s network TV pilot. I think it looks great for that. They really use, like, for example, the woodland setting very well, which you get in like the opening scene. I think that's very well done, and it looks very gothic and eerie. And basically, anytime the X-Files went into the forest or something like that, it always made for a scary scene. So it's definitely a fitting way to start the show. So some good mystery setup, some good like mythology. The iconic shot of the light bearing down on the girl and the way that opens, that's gone down in pop culture. Some great dialogue, some great humor, which is there pretty much from the start. I mean, with X-Files, it started the trend as like one of these shows where I think the appeal was partly that it was sort of like a mini movie each week, and they sort of took ideas from movies and from other TV shows. Obviously, something like the Twilight Zone would have been a big influence on the X-Files. They obviously they mentioned Mulder's backstory partly with his sister, and that becomes a very personal, scene with him and Scully. So it stands out. I think the style of it, how eerie it is, and just the quality of those two characters from the very off. And I don't know if you knew this, but Chris Carter was inspired by the Carly Sterling character from Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, but that makes sense. That actually does.
It does when you watch it. And obviously she's great when she first walks in. I've got a fact for you, which I can't believe this was ever considered, but apparently because of the success of Baywatch, they wanted Pamela Anderson for that role.
No,
I mean,
oh my God, just imagine that.
Yeah, I mean that just would be off. If you ever need proof that you shouldn't leave these things to network to decide, I think that proves it right there. So that's my number 7. I think
I did have a feeling that was going to be on your list because I know what an X-Files fan you are. I didn't watch the X-Files much growing up because I actually wasn't allowed to, but my best friend is a massive X-Files fan. Like, Mulder and Scully were like her first OTP. She used to tell me about the show all the time. So she had me watch the pilot episode a few years ago, and I remember being very impressed by how good it was, especially for a show in the 90s. I completely agree with you about the chemistry. From the second she walks into the bunker and, meets Mulder, you can just feel that chemistry between them, and you can feel that back and forth banter that they have for the rest of the series. I think they very clearly established the cynical versus believer angle, you know, that then
Yeah.
follows them through the series.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, which I think they do set up in that episode, is just how fair she is. Like, obviously,
Yes.
she is the cynic, and she does challenge him, and obviously is convinced by his ideas and what he's saying. But at the same time, she's ultimately interested in the truth and solving the case. She has that
And
morality.
she's never condescending to him, you know,
Yeah.
like she challenges him and she challenges his belief, but she never tells him, you know, you're stupid for having these beliefs. Well, that's very cool. So that's number 7 for you. So now we're going into my number 6, and my number 6 is the Supernatural pilot. Now, we all know that Supernatural became a monster unto its own and ran for so much longer than any of us could have expected it to, and became something completely different to what it originally was. But all the way back in 2005, was it? I remember watching this pilot and just absolutely loving it. Because originally Supernatural was a very small scale show. It was originally just going to be about 2 brothers trying to solve their mother's death and hunting monsters along the way. And I think that the first episode in particular really sets up the horror vibes, the supernatural vibes, and really establishes the characters. So I like that it starts in the past. We get to see Mary's death. We get to see that brilliant and horrifying opening scene where she burns to death on the roof, and we have that mystery. And then we fast forward, 20 odd years, and we see Sam at university, and we see Dean come to find him and reconnect. And I think that the Supernatural pilot is very eerie. I think it really sets up that this is going to be a horror series, that it's going to be scary. And then we get the first, case that they have, the first ghost is a woman in white, which is based on the legend of La Llorona. And I really like that it establishes that, at least for the first season, we were going to be dealing with urban legends. And as the first season goes on, you see them deal with other popular urban legends like Bloody Mary and the Hookman and, others from popular culture. And I think that this first episode does a really good job in establishing that. I think that the brothers and their dynamics and their individual personalities are established really well. We learn that they've been estranged for 4 years. We see that Dean is trying to reconnect with Sam, and we see that Sam is trying to have a normal life. And these are obviously character traits and characterization that will follow the boys through the first at least 5 seasons, which is basically what I count as the show. I count the first 5 seasons as Supernatural, and anything after that is just Supernatural 2.0, because those first 5 seasons are a complete story. So let's just leave it at that. And I really like how creepy the first episode is, because it is, like, when I first watched it, I was genuinely creeped out by this episode. It has very good direction, very good use of lighting and shadow. It creates a lot of atmosphere. I really like that we get that establishment of, like, how the boys do research. We get to see how they, pretend to be FBI agents, and they have their fake IDs, and we see how they work together. And then, of course, we get that very sad and very horrifying hook at the end, where Sam comes home and finds his girlfriend Jess burning to death on the ceiling in the exact same way that his mother did. So we have kind of almost like a full circle in the pilot alone, which then goes on to set up the rest of the season and set up Sam's motivation and set up the dynamics between the brothers and what's driving each of them. So, like I said, Supernatural kind of became a monster and turned into something that none of us expected, almost became a joke in and of itself with how convoluted it became and how ridiculous some of the later seasons became. But those first 5 seasons of Supernatural, had the show ended at season 5, I would say it would have been one of the better TV shows to come out of the early 2000s. Unfortunately, that got ruined, but those first 5 seasons are so good. And that first episode, for me, just sets that up so well. So even though the rest of the show went on to be kind of nuts, I still think the pilot is one of the better ones out there. So that is my number 6, the Supernatural pilot.
It's another one, as I was saying earlier, with one of the other shows. I've only seen the first episode. we did it on the stream, and I enjoyed it. But obviously, I can't comment too much because I've only seen that.
Well, if you are going to watch the rest of Supernatural, I would recommend just watching the first 5 seasons and then just checking out after that.
Number 6, which isn't a million miles away from like when you had Veronica Mars earlier, but my number 6 is My So-Called Life, the pilot. Have you ever seen this?
No,
I
I've
can't.
seen bits. No, here we go. Sorry, my microphone was muted. I have seen a couple of episodes. That's the one with Claire Danes, and it's got Jared Leto as well. It was a
Yeah,
mid
early.
'90s, and it only went for like a season, didn't it?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. Yes, I do remember My So-Called Life. I didn't see that much of it, but tell us why the pilot was so great.
So a bit similar to True Calling, where it was, tragically cut short before it's really prime, but one of the great like one season shows. And I think again for a teen show on network TV in the 90s, it was so ahead of its time and it was so good because sometimes when you watch like a teen show or a teen film, you can be entertained by it and there can be good dialogue and stuff, but sometimes you come away thinking that wasn't really that authentic, or I didn't get that much out of that outside of just it being quite entertaining and some good gags or dialogue. But with this, you're sort of hooked into her world, her headspace, as well as that of her friends from pretty much the start. I mean, I think probably one of the early famous scenes is when she's staggering through like the hallway at school, and she literally is sort of staggering, and it captures her bright sort of red hair, and it's just like shot from her point of view as she sees all the other kids, and it just captures like almost like the human jungle sort of thing that school is, and just the diversity, because for a 90s show it is pretty diverse when we see the different character types. Obviously, massive calling card for Claire Danes. She's just so perfect in the role where you can't see anybody else playing Angela Chase. I know one person that was considered was Alicia Silverstone. I don't mind her, but I can't see her.
No,
in
me
that
either.
role.
But no,
Oh,
not that type of
no.
role.
Obviously,
No.
good in Clueless and a couple of other things, but I can't see her there. But yeah, Claire Danes, amazing calling card for her. A lot of style, really well cast. Obviously, Jared Leto has had, for me, a mixed career and is a bit of a douchebag overall. But in that sort of bohemian, self-obsessed sort of role that he plays in that, he's definitely perfect casting. You have likable characters outside of that. Brian, who becomes a potential love interest for Angela, and no doubt if the show had got on, I'm sure they would have got together at some point. They have a really nice dynamic, and I mean I'm talking about the final episode here, but the end of the final episode is such a gut punch when you see, and it's similar thing as I was saying with, obviously you haven't seen it, so I won't say what it is, but it's similar thing to like we were saying with True Calling, where when you realise it's going to end like that, when you realise they've run out of time and they haven't tied it up, it's like, fucking hell. You're just so mad. You're just so mad that it would leave it like that in the final ever episode. This is one of the best examples of a great one season show where for like, I think it's 20 episodes, 22, it just nails it so well. As I said, you've got a great cast of characters. It's really mature in the way it deals with like not just the teens but also the parents. Like her parents, for example, are like really likable, down to earth, grounded parents. It feels like a very authentic portrait of teen life, and it's very, as I said, stylish, very witty. There's good humor in there. Such a shame they didn't do more. The pilot just hits you. It just hooks you straight away. Really doesn't miss a beat, the pilot.
So that's number 6 for you?
Yeah,
yes, number 6. Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen all of it, but I have seen bits and pieces, an episode here or there. And from what I saw, I remember thinking it was really good. But I've never heard a bad word about this show. Anytime you read articles about like shows that ended too soon or shows that had missed potential, that one is almost always there. And I do remember people saying how realistic it was in its portrayal of teen life and even just adulthood as well. And of course, in the early 90s, really the only teen show you had was Beverly Hills 90210, which which was not exactly the most realistic portrayal of teenagers. So I think my So-Called Life balanced against that definitely brought like a breath of fresh air. So it's definitely one that I'll have to go back and revisit, I think, and have another look at it, because I remember liking what I had seen. So now I'll have to go and check out the pilot. All right, so we have now reached the top 5. So coming in at my number 5, and I was loath to put this on the list because the show itself went completely off the rails, but my number 5 is the Once Upon a Time pilot. Now, Once Upon a Time was a show that had a very interesting premise. Obviously, it was going to be fairy tales, but in our world. And the pilot episode, I feel, does a great job of introducing the characters and introducing the subversive nature that was originally part of the show's shtick. So we open with Prince Charming writing to Snow White. You get the Snow White kiss where she wakes up from the coffin, and you think, okay, this is just kind of your typical fairy tales. But then we get this great subversion where the Wicked Witch interrupts their wedding and Snow White grabs Charming's sword and holds it out to the Queen, and you instantly get this, okay, so Snow is actually a bit of a badass, and you start to get the subversion that they're putting on the fairy tales. Then in the modern world, we are given a fantastic, absolutely brilliant introduction to our protagonist, Emma Swan, where we meet her where we think she's on a date, but then you find out that she's actually a bounty hunter and she's hunting this guy down, and you get this great shot where he tries to run out of the restaurant and she's just kind of like, oh, for God's sake, and she just walks out after him in her high heels, and she's kind of parked his car in so he can't escape. And then you see her go to her house, and you get this beautiful, poignant shot of her alone making a wish. And you get to realize that she really is a solitary character. And then this knock on the door comes, and it turns out it's this kid that she gave up for adoption 10 years before. And all of this happens within like the first 15 minutes of the episode, but it feels really natural and it flows really well. And you find out that this kid is from a town called Storybrooke, and that she is somehow the savior that needs to come and save them all. And then you start to get the explanation for why these fairy tale characters are in the real world. You get to see the enchanted forest where they came from. You get to see the evil queen cast the curse that has sent them here. We get the establishment of all of these other really cool fairy tale characters. We get to see Red Riding Hood. We get to see Pinocchio and Geppetto. We get to see the Seven Dwarves. And you get introduced to all these characters that we obviously know because everyone grows up with fairy tales. But you get this beautiful introduction to these characters in a completely different setting and in a completely different time and place. You get to see what they'd be like as modern characters, how they would function in our world. And you get Emma Swan, who is this cynical non-believer, and this kid who's trying to tell her, you're supposed to be our savior. And you get all of this beautiful establishment for what would be a fantastic first season. Like the first season of Once Upon a Time is so good. It takes all these fairy tales that we know and love and completely turns them on its head. And then, of course, you have the real world running alongside it, and Emma learning about who she is and learning to accept that she really is the savior and she really is there to break the curse. And her characterization is just fantastic. And it's just such a great pilot, and it leads into such a great first season. And then the show just completely went off the rails, unfortunately. I think it was around season 3, they killed off a character that was a main character and who was like a catalyst for like the entire series. They killed this character off. They completely decimated Emma's character, and then it kind of starts going round and round in circles. Like every season it's like they're cursed, they've lost their memories, they have to break the curse, they get their memories back, and that just kind of is like rinse and repeat for the last 4 seasons of the show. But there's no denying that the pilot is a really great pilot. It's just really fun, really establishes everything you know. It lets you know that, yes, these are fairy tales, but these are fairy tales not the way you know them. And it's just a really, really great first episode. It's just a pity that the rest of the show kind of went down the drain. But that is my number 5, the Once Upon a Time pilot.
I can't comment. I've never seen any of that show.
Maybe
so I don't know. Yeah, if it'll. I'm not sure if it'll be my sort of thing. But the people who do love it seem to really love it. I mean, probably especially those early seasons. So Obviously, I'll try anything, pretty much anything, at least once. Top 5 now, and so far we've only had one crossover.
I know, so it should be interesting. There's still one that I think is going to pop up on both our lists, but
Yeah,
we'll
I
see
think
if I'm
there's
right.
still at least one, maybe two. But my number 5, which again is for me the pilot to one of my favorite ever shows, and it really hits the ground running. It's the 6 Feet Under pilot from HBO from 2001. Definitely one of the very early HBO shows to establish it as like a network to watch. For those you don't really know, I'm sure a lot of you would have heard of the show at least, but it has this sort of very quirky, sort of unique type premise where you have a family run funeral home. I'm not sure I should spoil exactly the chain of events in that first episode, but basically it gets left to the sons, and one of the sons, like the Nate character, the Peter Kraz character, he essentially is in from out of town for Christmas, and this is unexpected. He didn't expect it to get left to him. He's never had any interest in it. And from very early on in that opening episode where the characters have to get together, sense of this past and the difference between them. Obviously, you've got Michael C. Hall as like the younger brother and pre-Dexter, but you can see just what a different character he is compared to Nate. They're sort of worlds apart, but like the beauty of 6 Feet Under is that over the course of 5 really great seasons is it slowly unpacks what's lurking beneath them. And again, it's playing on that metaphor. It's using the funeral home and death, and kind of as Nate says, I think in the pilot, it says about, why do we dress this up? Why do we sanitize this? It is what it is. It's death. It's ugly. It's nasty. And, I'm going to express myself, sort of thing. So it slowly over the course of 5 seasons unpacks that stuff and shows you the different layers to this character. Again, just really diverse characters, really ahead of its time for some of the themes, for some of the social themes, and great cast, fantastic cast. I can't imagine anyone else playing the Fisher family. That's like just top to bottom, they've cast it really well as some of the supporting characters. I mean, I've got a personal love for Rachel Griffins as Brenda. I think that's one of my all-time favorite characters. You've got obviously Jeremy Sisto, great character actor, plays. Yeah, he's in it. He plays her brother Billy, and they have a fascinating but also very disturbing relationship. But they're just great, like on-screen, like siblings, the way they play off each other. Yeah, I think in essence that's what makes it so unique. Then they use the family dynamic but juxtaposed with this idea of them running a funeral home, and just how surreal that is and how macabre and morbid it is to like just grow up around death and this sort of thing. And it does that classic thing of making the idea of death more accessible and more sort of funny, but also like humanistic as well. And that's something the opening, like the first episode, does, where they're at this funeral, and it just captures like the cringeworthy sort of black humor that sometimes comes out of this situation, which is very, I think, true to life. And again, it's just that perfect balance of like, it's a really funny scene, but also a really real and emotional scene. And that's the tone and the line which it sets up from the start. So they subvert your expectations a lot, but great acting, great characters, and it's a credit to the show that really after that first season it only gets better. The finale's very famous as well. It has
very cool. Well, I haven't seen it, but we have talked about reviewing it on the channel, so I will hopefully check it out soon. But actually, you just describing the premise of like being in a funeral home and the absurdity of that reminds me of the movie My Girl, and Vader's character, being in a funeral home, because that has a similar kind of black comedy of like what happens and how does it affect you when you grow up in that kind of environment. So I think that'll be interesting to check out. I did wonder if that one would be on your list because you mentioned recently to me that it's like one of your favorite shows. show. So I was like, I wonder if it's got a good pilot to go with the rest of it. So we'll definitely have to check that out at some point. It seems
it's a
up my
very
alley. I like a bit of black humor and a bit of, absurdity. So we'll definitely have to have a look at that.
Okay.
So my number 4, coming in at number 4 for me, is the pilot for The OC. I love this episode. Now, The OC is one of those ones that, again, is a bit of a mixed bag. The first season is fantastic. After that, we're a bit up and down. But the pilot in and of itself, I think, is one of those pilots that just does everything right. It opens with our main character, Ryan, getting into a car crash with his brother, and we see him go to a juvenile center, and that's where he meets his public defender, Sandy Cohen. Again, one of the best TV dads of all time. Just love Sandy Cohen. He's fantastic. Played by Peter Gallagher and his fantastic eyebrows.
Yeah, I was
He's
going to
so
ask,
good.
is that the one played by Peter?
Yes. Yes. So we get the establishment of Ryan being from this town called Chino. He's obviously a kid who comes from a very poor, very dysfunctional family. You see after his public defender, Sandy, gets him out of jail, he goes home and his mother kicks him out. And he's trying to call around to his friends to see who he can go and stay with. And he eventually ends up calling his lawyer. Sandy pulls up and he's like, yeah, see, I told you could have done worse. And Sandy takes him to Orange County, which is a completely different world to the one that Ryan is used to. They live in a gated community in a massive, big Spanish-style mansion, and the pilot episode perfectly shows the fish out of water element of Ryan and him coming to this family who at first are a little wary of him, but he instantly has a rapport with their son Seth, who is played by Adam Brody, and like his star-making role. Seth is possibly the most awkward character you'll ever come across, but it beautifully establishes them. We have the iconic meeting between him and Marissa, Misha Barton's character. Ryan and Marissa obviously went on to be a fantastic, very iconic teen couple. And throughout the whole episode, we get to see Ryan kind of ingratiated into this world that is so foreign to him. You see him attending benefits. There's this running gag where no one quite knows where he's from. He's like the cousin from Canada. And everyone's like, did I hear you were from Ottawa? Did I hear you were from South America? Did I hear you came from England? Like, no one quite knows where he's come from. And then we have a great party scene where we find out about Steph's crush on Summer, and we see Ryan and Marissa flirting. We establish Marissa's character, who is kind of a borderline alcoholic. We get the iconic line, "Welcome to the OC, bitch," from a few guys who try to beat Ryan up. And at the end of the episode, Ryan goes home to find that his mother has packed up her whole house and just abandoned him. And the episode ends with Sandy taking him home for good, and that's where we get the establishment of poor kid coming to live with the Cohens. Now, the first episode of the OC is just a really well-written, well-directed episode. The acting is superb. You get to know all the characters and all the dynamics really well. Even from the first episode, I think it really delves into the characterization really well. Marissa and Ryan in particular, their characters are established so well in this first episode. And you can feel the connection between her and Ryan, like a lot, even from the very first episode. Plus, they have a really creative way in this episode of using the theme song. So the theme song for the OC is the California Here I Come, which they usually use with a credit sequence. But in the pilot episode, they play it over the scene of Ryan calling all of his friends and trying to find somewhere to stay. And it's just a really nice way to kind of slip the theme song in without it being a full-on credit sequence in the pilot episode. So I always really liked that. It's beautifully filmed. It beautifully establishes the Orange County setting, the California setting, the beach, the houses, this opulent world that this little poor kid has suddenly entered. And then you have the hook at the end with him going home because his mother's run off, which is, him coming to live with the Cohens. Now, like I said, the rest of the series does go a bit up and down. The first season, I think, is actually really good. Seasons 2 and 3 and 4, very mixed bag. The first season is incredibly strong, and the pilot episode is honestly one of the best episodes of teen drama ever. I mean, I've seen so many TV lists that actually list it as one of the best episodes of TV. It's just so well made, and it just establishes the show so well. So that's my number 4, the OC pilot.
Fair play, because I didn't expect something. Well, first of all, not necessarily to be on the list, but to be so high. So I mean that does say something. And I can't comment. I've only seen bits and pieces, and so I can't really comment.
I'd recommend giving the first season a go. It's funny, it's well written, and it's got some good performances, but the rest of it does go up and down a bit.
Okay, so that's the OC there. So my number 4, which I might sort of sing the opening bars of the theme tune just to let you know which one it is, but it's "Take my love, take my hand, take me where I cannot stand," and
I
that's
don't
enough.
care. I'm still free. You can't take the sky from me.
There you go. Classic podcast moment. It's Firefly Serenity, which I'm cheating a bit because technically it wasn't the pilot because those idiots at Fox aired it out of order
I know, right? I will never
for
get over that.
whatever reason. But
Dumbass.
so this lines up quite well with my so-called life earlier, which I had because it's I think the other classic example of a one season show, which was so good in that first season, and it's so frustrating that it only got that one season. And I think it's sort of in that order where I would say My So-Called Life is the second best like one season show that I've seen, and this is definitely even better. Obviously, Whedon show has many of the classic Whedon themes to do with family, to do with an oddball collective of characters. Again, it follows some of the familiar like sort of characteristics he's had in Buffy and in Angels, where you have like characters with humor, character with heart, a more like rugged sort of muscle bound or macho type character like Jane. Obviously someone like Keeley is kind of the Willow of the show, if you like. So you do have like characters that sort of again have similar characteristics, but again, he just makes it work within a new sort of world and new sort of universe, which is like this space western, which I think is quite a unique mix. Because sometimes, for a western, I'm not a big western guy. I'm more of a sci-fi guy, but obviously there's been so many like space sci-fi shows, and some are better than others, but to actually bring the genres together, which I think is what makes this so unique and distinct, and obviously just the quality of the characters and the performances. And I would say this is Whedon's best pilot easily. I mean, we can talk about some of the others, but I think Buffy has a decent to good pilot, similar with Angel. Dollhouse is a bit more mixed, that pilot. I've seen the first episode of The Nevers. I didn't really get into that. Easily his best pilot. It sort of hits all the notes. Again, for a pilot which was like early 2000s network, where they probably didn't have that much money, it looks really good for that. The special effects are good for like an early 2000s network show. Again, there's some good crisp, sharp action going on. That opening war scene is very good for what it is, and it does a great job of setting up the characters and their sort of like darker pasts, if you like. I think Malcolm Reynolds is a great anti-hero.
Yeah.
I like a lot of like the light and dark and the grey areas with some of the other characters. I like how likable they make Alara, and how it's not just a stereotypical like hooker with a heart of gold or stereotypical, sexualized hooker. How there's more going on with her character, and how they have a really enjoyable, likable sort of screwball will they won't they style, thing going on there. It's a really great pilot. Again, it's sort of feature length or close to feature length, and that really makes a difference. I think he really gets a good amount of time to show what the show is sort of going to be, but also tells a complete like contained story as well. And it's pretty much a perfect pilot. I think it's fantastic. One season show. See, unlike some of the other shows which we said which were cancelled early, this at least does have quite a satisfying finale, as much as you can do, considering it was rushed, whatever it was, 12, 13 episodes. But
yeah,
obviously the movie did a good job of later giving some sort of closure. But yeah, really great pilot. Kind of gets better every time I see it. Serenity.
The Firefly pilot is good. There are some moments in it that I just absolutely love, some comedic moments and also some dramatic moments. Like one of my favorite scenes in the entire series is Wash with his dinosaurs. That's just such a great character establishing moment. Just curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. Just so good.
I think that was improvised as well, wasn't it?
Really? That wouldn't surprise me at all.
I'm pretty sure I heard, yeah.
It's such a great little scene. Yeah. I love the revelation of River in the box, and then the bigger revelation of like who she is, because they find her and Malcolm's like, oh, I'm sorry, was this one for you? Were you this is your little pet whore or whatever? And then they're like, what the hell is this? And Simon's like, this is my sister. And just that establishment. Simon is one of my favorite characters. But I think the scene that impacted me the most in that first episode was the Reavers scene, when they say that they're passing a Reaver ship and the entire crew just their facial expressions and their body language and the way they all just kind of instantly, the demeanor changes. It really establishes, the Reavers as a general concept is something that is a whole other conversation, but I think that scene really establishes the fear of them and really establishes how terrifying they are, and it does it with so little dialogue. It's just watching a character like Zoe, who's yes, exactly, and it's great. So yeah, definitely hear you on it. Is a really good pilot. Now it's kind of interesting that you've put that one as your number 4, because it kind of leads into my number 3, which is also from a Whedon show. My number 3 is the Angel pilot, also known as City Off. Now, this is my favorite Whedon pilot. Angel is my favorite Whedonverse show. I love Angel. Some of the other Whedonverse shows have, over time, kind of their shine has dulled a little bit for me, but not Angel. And I think that City Off does a really good job of not only differentiating Angel from Buffy, but I think that if you haven't watched Buffy, you can still watch Angel and it gives you all the information that you need without feeling like an exposition dump. I love the opening voiceover about LA and how it shines at night, but underneath there's a whole different world. And I think that really establishes the tone of Angel. I think that Angel as a character, we get to see a lot more of him, like the different sides to him in this pilot episode than we did across 3 seasons of Buffy. I love the opening fight where he takes out 2 vampires, one of which is played by Sawyer from Lost. Yeah. If the next time you watch that, I was like, oh, Sawyer's a vampire. And then you see him glance at the victim and she's bleeding and he kind of has to turn away and everything. You get the beautiful introduction of Doyle, who, R.I.P. Francis. No, not Francis. I forgot his name at the moment, but you know who I'm talking about. And Glenn, that's the one. And I love Doyle. I love his and Angel's easy rapport. I like how they kind of use Doyle to give us the background information that we need. And I love the little kind of lampshading from Angel where he's like, okay, so you've told me my life story, which I already know, given that it is my life story. And Doyle's like, but we haven't gotten to the next part. Love the reintroduction of Cordelia. Again, I think if you haven't watched Buffy, this pilot gives you a good, a good establishment of Cordelia's character so that you kind of know who she is and where she's coming from. And what I really like about the Angel pilot is that it shows you how different a show is going to be from Buffy. So if you look at the Buffy pilot, Buffy saves the day at the end of the pilot, she goes into battle and she loses like one person, but she saves the main people and she saves the day. Whereas in Angel's pilot, we see him connect with this girl, Tracy. She's in trouble. She needs help. And he doesn't save her. He's not quick enough to save her. But then at the end of the pilot, he saves Cordelia and she helps him to set up Angel investigations. And he ends up giving her purpose, which she hasn't had the whole episode. She's been floundering. So I think that just beautifully sets up the mantra of, if nothing you do matters, because Tracy died anyway, then all that matters is what you do because you helped Cordelia. So I think that the fact that Angel didn't save the girl really emphasizes that we're going into a more gray area. You know, we're going into a more kind of noir area. Buffy was very much about she was the hero and she will save the day, whereas Angel is about redemption and what does it mean to be a champion. And I think that that first episode sets that up really well. Plus, I love that they introduce Wolfram and Hart. We get introduced to Lindsay, who will become a big antagonist. And one of my favorite Angel moments when he tosses the vampire out the window and he's all like, "Oh, you think you can do anything? Can you fly?" And then he just kicks him out the window, and you get that great scene. There was in the script, and they didn't use it here, and part of me wishes they did, that when Angel finds Tracy's body, he originally was going to feed off her, and it was going to show that he, you know, is a bit lost. Part of me wishes they did keep that in, but I think it may have been a little too dark. And we do kind of get a similar scene in Orpheus, where Faith witnesses Angel try to stop a holdup, and the guy gets shot, and he ends up feeding off the victim who gets shot. So I kind of get why they didn't put it in, but I just think that this pilot episode just establishes everything you need to know about Angel the series. We get to see how awkward Angel can be when he's trying to make conversation with Tracy, and he just has no idea how to start up a conversation. So you get to see a little bit more of Angel's character than you did in Buffy, and I just think Angel as a series is so good. I know it definitely has its ups and downs. Season 4 is a whole hot mess that at some point in time we'll have to discuss. But I think that Angel, right from the beginning, had a very clear sense of its mission statement and of its themes and of its main character. And I think that the pilot establishes that really, really well. So for me, number 3 is City Off, the Angel pilot.
Yeah, really good choice. I think it is a strong pilot. I would say personal choice. I still prefer the Buffy pilot a little bit, just a smidge, but it's pretty close. I think for a first episode of a new show and having to, as you said, continue on from Buffy, but also do your own thing. I think it does do a good job in that. And it's funny you mention Orpheus because that's probably my favorite ever episode, but it's sort of ironic because it's in that season, which I'm very mixed on as well as you. But I think actually it might be my favorite ever episode
Orpheus is a
of
great
the
episode.
show. It's a great episode.
I get that. It is so good. We'll definitely have to delve deeper into Angel at some point in time, I think, because there's so much to discuss with that show.
Yeah, I think we will definitely at some point. Okay. So my number 3, which I will say is the oldest show I've got on this list. We're going back all the way to 1963 with this one. This is the Fugitive pilot, which is
wow.
Yeah, Desert City, or Desert City, I should say. Desert City. Desert City is the name.
Hey, Desert City sounds good.
Yeah, both sounds good, really. But yeah. So, yeah, obviously, I don't know if you've seen any of this show.
No, I haven't. I only know about the movie.
Yeah, this is where it all originated and just everything in context. I mean, this show was so far ahead of its time as a crime show. It became this completely serialized storyline over 4 seasons. Now, again, similar to some of my other things, I've only seen the pilot. I rewatched it today because it was definitely obviously consideration and I wanted to determine where it was going to be on the list and things like that. And it's just as good the second time around. So that's really great. Again, so much of this for a crime procedural type show back in the 60s was really ahead of its time, where in this episode you already see this fine balance between procedural case of the week but also obviously something a bit more serialized. It looks again very cinematic. You've got the film noir style, you've got a very hard-boiled sort of characteristic and some of the nature of the story and the character, where they do go for some quite hard-hitting gritty type themes. Obviously the premise of the show is that Richard Kimball is falsely accused and arrested for his wife's murder. when he's been like transferred to like the prison on this train, there's a random sort of accident and he escapes, you know, from the train and then goes on the run. And the whole thing looking for this other character, the other main character, who's the one-armed man, who is the guy who actually killed his wife. So he's looking to find him so that he can clear his name, basically. And then you've got this detective who we see a little bit of at the end of the pilot, or near the end, who's sort of tracking him down. So those are like the three main characters. What actually happens in the pilot is then after he's like escaped, Kimball goes to like this new town and he actually takes a job in a diner, and he meets this girl, Monica, played by Vera Miles, who obviously was a big star around this time, had quite a big career, but this was obviously, for them to get her for the pilot was quite a big deal. But she plays Monica, and they sort of start up, you know, get a bit of chemistry, start getting, you know, interested in each other. She's got a young son. He wants to do the right thing by then. But at the same time, yeah, he has to look out for himself as well. So you sort of get that morality and what does he do exactly. And the episode is really edge of your seat stuff where it's really tense and it keeps you, you know, guessing sort of how it's going to play out. Really good style, as I said, the noir and just the direction of it. It does look very good for like 60s TV. It does look very cinematic. Great music. They've obviously cast it very well. Again, very much ahead of its time, which I hear it is like over the course of the season, like the 4 seasons it had. And, you know, I know the finale is famous for being one of those very early great TV event type finales where it had, I think at the time, the highest viewing figures for a TV finale, really high viewing figures. So it again was a very influential show, and I think this pilot, you know, having seen it twice now, really holds up as one of the best pilots I've seen. So that's The Futurist. The Futurist. I'm getting words wrong. The Fugitive.
All good.
Desert City.
Well, can't really comment. Haven't seen it. Like I said, haven't seen the movie. I only just know about the movie from, you know, bits and pieces here and there. I've never seen it, but might have to check it out. But definitely an interesting choice. All right, so we are at the top 2 now. Final 2. So my number 2 is the Charmed pilot, and we're talking about the original Charmed, people. None of this new CW crap. No, the original Charmed pilot from 1998, Something Wicker This Way Comes. Now, first of all, I really love the title. I love the little play on the Something Wicked This Way Comes. I thought it was such a fun title. Now, Charmed gets a lot of crap. It really does. And I do agree that some of it is warranted. It's not the most well put together show. The later seasons are ridiculous, and you know, it doesn't have the depth or gravity that a lot of other supernatural shows did around that time. But what I do think that Charmed is fantastic at, and I mentioned this in my most recent Page video when I did my video analyzing Page, is Charmed is fantastic at establishing characterization and dynamics. And I think that the Charmed pilot does that so well. So the opening alone, which is we see a practitioner of magic, and we get some beautiful like magic sound effects, and she's got her altar and her candles and her familiar, and so we instantly get this wonderful 90s vibe kind of to the craft. You can tell that they took inspiration from the craft, and then she gets knifed, she gets killed, and then we get our 2 detectives, Andy Trudeau and Daryl Morris, who are both main characters, and we get this great scene establishing almost a Mulder and Scully type vibe. Andy is the believer and Daryl is the skeptic, and Andy's trying to convince Daryl. And I just think that this early scene, we just get this great establishment of these 2 characters and their characterization, which then follows them through the season. Then we get the scene which introduces us to the sisters. And once again, it introduces them in this beautiful, seamless way that instantly establishes their dynamic. We see Prue having a go at Piper for not being home to meet the electrician. We see Phoebe come home after being estranged for 6 months. She's been in New York, and we immediately see how she and Prue clash and how Piper has to play the middle sister. But we also see that Prue has a maternal side to her when she brings Phoebe an extra blanket, even though she's not happy with her being there. And then, of course, we get the Book of Shadows scene, which is one of my favorite scenes, where Phoebe goes up to the attic and reads the incantation and activates their powers. We have the chandelier like light up, which we get a great callback to that in season 4 when Paige is established as the new sister. And I just think within the first like 15 minutes of the show, we already know all these characters. Then we get to see all their powers activate, and then you have them have to do the spell together at the end. We see Andy and Prue reconnect, and we find out that they have a history. And I just think that the whole episode is really fun. It moves really well. It establishes the characters really well, and it gives us a nice little like hook at the end where they say that they're going to be the charmed ones, and they find out that more demons are going to be coming after them, but they've got to stick together. So we find out that they're going to have to grow back together as sisters and become closer again. And then, of course, we have Prue closing the door with her powers, which becomes a running gag where she closes the door every season that she's alive. And that becomes like a little thing that is carried on. And so even though I do agree that the writing of Charmed can go a bit all over the place and that it's not the most intelligent or well thought out show, I think it does have one of the best pilots I've ever seen, and just really establishes the tone and the magic feel and just everything. And the effects are not too bad, given that it's 1998. Like Prue's telekinesis and Piper's freezing power, it's not too shabby. I mean, it's not fantastic. You know, obviously new shows can do a lot more, but just overall, I just really love the Charmed pilot, and I think it just does a great job at establishing the show. So that's my number 2 pick, Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Okay, not nicely done. I enjoy the pilot. I think it's solid. I don't feel as strongly about it as you. I think it's another show that got better over time, but you know, I do enjoy especially those early seasons, the first sort of 3 and 4. Yeah. Prue's obviously, as I've said to you before, is my favourite of the sisters. So
yes, me too.
Yeah, there you go. It's not surprising, and I prefer those early seasons for her involvement. But yeah, I agree. It definitely sets up a good sort of dynamic early on between them, and some pretty good like intrigue and stuff. So not bad effects. I agree for a show back then, network show, not too bad. So I enjoy it. It's solid stuff. Okay, my number 2 is The Lost pilot. So it's parts 1 and 2, obviously, because it was a 2-parter. And I think just for event TV, for like, I mean, this is kind of the most disaster type movie never to be a disaster movie. That's what sort of this pilot is. It should terrify anyone about ever going on a plane again. And just the budget and the quality of like the visuals and the set. I mean, that plane set is just so well done, just so realistic and convincing. I mean, they spent the money so well, and the way it just throws you into like this disaster and the world, and then obviously starts to focus slowly on the different characters. Great direction by J.J. Ambrose, really showing when he's at his best what a good director he can be. And just, again, just big, spectacular, event-filled TV. So many exciting elements, so many, like, meaty character stuff that's set up with obviously Jack, with a bunch of others, with John Locke, who's a really interesting characters over the course of the show, and many great, you know, characters and sort of subplots which are set up, and again, I think it goes back to that perfect balance where obviously Lost is like this brilliant hybrid of like mystery, thriller, action, sci-fi, so many different things, and it sets, you know, at least a couple of those sorts of things up in the pilot, and it definitely sets up then this is going to be a mystery, you know, that they're on an island but they're not quite sure why they're there or exactly what's going on the island. Gives you just enough breadcrumbs to like be intrigued, and I think they get the perfect balance in that. And it's always, whenever I put that pilot on, it is always such a satisfying thrill ride from beginning to end. And again, it like I said before, it feels like a full course sort of thing. It feels like you're really getting your money's worth. And you know, arguably over the years, I know some people are a bit divided on Lost in later seasons, but I mean, for me, when it really dives into the characters and the concepts and really experiments, I think the show just gets better from there. And I think it's actually those sort of, you know, season 2, 3, 4 that actually makes it one of the best shows of all times, and one of the great like water cooler type event type shows. But the pilot does a great job of setting up that sort of feel. Great music as well. Really, you know, one of the great early, in terms of, you know, music on TV being like,
oh yeah,
more like
the
film
Lost
music,
score
more
is amazing.
you
So
know.
many of the motifs on that show are just beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
I think you know, but do you want to guess at what my number one is?
Ooh. See, I'm split between two, but I'm not sure you absolutely love the show. I'll go with Lost.
It is. My
It
number
is,
one
okay.
is the Lost
Okay.
pilot, because it's like you said, it is so fantastic. I don't think there is a pilot out there that can beat the Lost pilot. That even just the first
Well,
shot
clearly
of
there's
Jack's,
one, because I haven't said
well,
mine.
in your opinion, there's one. In my opinion, there is not. But we wouldn't be us if we didn't have a little argument. So, but the Lost pilot is just from that first shot of Jack's eye opening, and I just love how he wakes up in the jungle, and you're like, what's going on? What's happening? And then you have that lack of sound, and he stumbles onto the beach, and then, like you said, that spectacle of the plane just having crashed, and the chaos and the adrenaline, and then you get that like solid 10 minutes of like Jack just running through the wreckage and helping anyone he can, and then the, you know, the propeller explodes, and you've got Locke, and you know, he's sitting there, and you know, so there's something going on with him, and then Jack's just running around like a madman just helping everyone, and it's just such a huge scale, like just the way that it just throws you straight into the action. You just can't look away. I watched the Lost pilot when it first aired, and I remember just being so sucked in and so excited, and just so many moments, like even after it starts to slow down after the initial you know, crash, I love the moment when they go up to the hill to try and send out the signal, and they hear the transmission, the French transmission, and as Shannon's translating, you know, she's like, the others are dead, it killed them, send help. And then Charlie's just like, guys, where are we? And it's just that kind of horror of like, you haven't just crashed, you've crashed somewhere that horrible things have already happened. You've picked up this transmission that they find out has been playing on a loop for 20 years. Then there's, you know, what happens to the pilot, and how the pilot tells them we were off course. They don't know where to look for us. So you're like, oh, shitballs. So we've got like another thing. You have the epileptic trees, which spawned a whole thing of like, what's going on there? Yeah. The polar bear. Where the hell did the polar bear come from? So you have all of these plot mysteries, but then you also have the characters. Even the characters right from the get-go, you know, you want to know what's going on with them. You think that Sawyer is just some jackass, and then you see him with his letter, which we'll get into. Kate is obviously hiding a secret. They find the handcuffs on the plane, and they're like, there's a prisoner on board here. And just everything about the pilot is just so brilliant. And of course, Lost as a show is just fantastic. One of my favorite shows of all time, has some of the best characterization I've ever come across in any show. Like, whenever people talk about Lost, they always talk about like the plot and everything. I'm like, look, the plot is great, but the characters on Lost, some of the best characters I've ever come across. James Ford, Juliet Burke, even John Locke, who I don't actually like, but is a really interesting character. All of the characters are just, they're fantastic. And the emotion in this show, like, Jesus Christ, I cried like a baby in so many episodes. And some of the best reveals, not Penny's boat, one of the best moments on TV ever. Just everything about Lost I love. But the pilot, in my opinion, is the best TV pilot of all time. And I just absolutely love it. So it's my number one favorite pilot ever. Just so good. So yeah, it's cool that it's your number two because that led into my number one.
That lines up well. Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not surprised, but really good choice. I mean, they really couldn't have done a much better job than with the pilot as they did. So, if you want to take a guess at my number one,
I thought it may have been Buffy, but you mentioned that Firefly is a better pilot, so now I'm not sure. The only other one I could maybe think of, because as far as shows that you watch, is maybe Breaking Bad, because I've heard that has a really good pilot, but I honestly don't know now, so I'm very curious. So do share.
Yeah, you're forgetting such a big, crucial show. It is Twin Peaks.
Oh, of course. I even thought earlier in here, I was like, where's Twin Peaks going to land on Keith's list? I can't believe I forgot that. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Now that makes sense.
and this is funny because when I said I was between two for yours, I thought that this was the other one I considered because I'm sure you've seen at least the first few, haven't you?
I have, but not for years. Not for years and years. So I really couldn't, list it on here.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, obviously, if you'd seen this recently, I think it would stick with you more.
Probably.
Because it is so memorable. But yeah, obviously, the show, the pilot, that changed TV forever. I mean, it was a cult phenomenon. And just to have Lynch, you know, this really oddball, arty director whose films are just so surreal and, you know, creepy and sinister and stylish, just to have him make the transition to TV and to team up with Mark Frost, who obviously made his name on like Hill Street Blues and shows like that. You know, I mean, that just seemed like the perfect marriage made in heaven where, you know, he was kind of like the foil to Lynch's like oddballness. He brought a bit more of a mainstream sensibility and sort of storytelling. But you had that nice little blend of surrealism, off the wall type humor, oddball, very scary characters in terms when it comes to Bob and also other characters. A lot of times when you see what's happening, I mean, in the pilot, but across the episodes in general, you just think, how the hell does this work? But it just does because Lynch, you know, just has this unique style where he just paints his shows or his films. He builds them from the ground up. Obviously, sound is very important in his work. Mood's very important. The atmosphere, the use of music's very important. The sort of use of color and mood and the rest of it, and just the level of detail. You know, the fact that like Bob was like an accident, you know, like the actor was just, he was like the set dresser or something, and Lynch just saw him in the back of the shot and just randomly decided you're going to be like this character sort of thing, which is such a Lynch thing to do, really. And you think, well, how's it going to work? I mean, is he going to be any good at acting sort of thing? But it obviously just worked so well, perfectly. And he's gone down now as one of the great villains, really, on TV or anywhere in a way. But obviously the opening shot is so memorable, her body wrapped in plastic and the line wrapped in plastic, that delivery, which is just great. And obviously, again, similar to some of the other pilots we've discussed, where this was like feature length and it was actually released as a movie in like parts of Europe, so it was sort of, in a
Okay.
way, seen more as a film, which is sort of interesting. But with it being, again, feature length, that's a good way to see it. And when you watch it, and every time you rewatch it, it just knocks you out, and it just changed the game so much. Creative use of colors, so much energy, so much the characters just reaching out from the screen and grabbing you. Obviously, you've got things like the Audrey stuff, the dance in the calf, which is so iconic now. And Audrey's one of my favorite ever characters for sure.
Sherilyn Fenn, right? That's Sherilyn Fenn.
Yeah, she's so perfect in that role, and just everything that character does pretty much throughout. I just love. Yeah, it's just such a well directed, just such an entertaining, but also tragic and powerful pilot. Like when you see the various reactions around this town about this death, which none of them saw coming, and it's almost the tragedy, I think, of Twin Peaks when you talk about it and analyze it. Ultimately, part of like the human side of what's going on with the series is just this tragic idea that Laura Palmer had to die, really, kind of to escape, to become free, and that's partly what's so powerful about the end of Fire Walk with Me. That last scene it sort of is her release type thing. Yeah, it's really powerful stuff, and the way he picks his shots so well, with everything so deliberate, but it's just the perfect package, just the perfect mix of all these different genres that Lynch obviously loved growing up. It's an unforgettable pilot, and I think it just edges Lost out for me just because of how important culturally it is, just how it changed for TV. And yeah, obviously a bit like Lost on the whole, we've got some great Twin Peaks discussions in our future, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot to talk about.
Because my number 10 was Veronica Mars, which is very clearly inspired by Twin Peaks, with the murder of Lily Kane. So it's kind of nice that your number 1 is Twin Peaks. It kind of creates a little, kind of full circle to the list. So I'm actually surprised. I thought the two that we would cross over with, I knew that we'd both have Lost because, well, duh. But I thought Angel would make it onto your list. I thought at least one Whedon show would. So I thought our two that would line up would be Lost and Angel. So it was kind of cool that it was Lost and Desperate Housewives. I didn't know whether or not you'd have that one on the list.
One was a surprise.
Like some of your choices, I just was not expecting. Because I've never really heard of The Fugitive one, and then so that was a bit of a surprise. So I had a feeling XFiles was going to turn up, and I did think of Twin Peaks, but I just blanked by the time we got to down to the first ones. But yeah, some surprises, good discussion. So tell us now, what almost made it to the list? What didn't quite make the cut, but would still get an honourable mention for you?
Okay. So there's a few. I mean, Buffy was close. I think I sort of have similar feelings to that and the show as X-Files, like certain amount of nostalgia or just, I think they fit quite close together in the sort of shows they are. But Buffy's pilot was close. Veronica Mars pilot was very close. I really like that a lot, so that's very strong. Oh, I'll tell you also, and another case of a show where I've only seen one episode, but I really liked the pilot, was Friday Night Lights. I thought that was...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of Friday Night Lights. Yeah, that has been a show that I've been wanting to check out for a while.
Yeah, I know Cindy, who follows us, is a big fan. And again, we watched the pilot on the live stream. And I tell you, I don't know how close it was, but I tell you what's quite an underrated pilot is the Roswell High pilot, actually, or just Roswell.
The original Roswell from the late 90s. I actually bought that box set recently because I've never seen it. So I actually found it for sale and just went, oh, hey, this will be a good opportunity. So that gives me incentive to go and watch it now. So those were your honorable mentions, the ones that almost made the cut, but not quite.
Yeah. Do you have any?
So I almost put the Smallville pilot on my list. It's actually, as we were talking off screen before, I love Smallville. And the pilot is a very fun pilot. It starts with the meteor shower that brings Clark to Earth. You get some great establishment, characterization for Clark, for Lex, for Lana. It's a really fun pilot. Didn't quite make the cut because I just feel like these ones are just better quality. The Pretty Little Liars pilot almost made the cut as well, because that one is kind of I remember when I first watched Pretty Little Liars, I remember thinking after the first pilot, this feels kind of like a teen Desperate Housewives. It kind of had that same feel. Again, being a CW show, little bit lesser quality, little bit lower quality than the others on this list. And I contemplated Buffy and Firefly, but at the end of the day, both of those shows have lost a little shine for me, not least because of like all the crap with Joss Whedon, and I just feel that there are some aspects to both shows that I don't feel 100% comfortable with, and so both shows have kind of diminished a little bit for me, so neither of them went on. And then the last one was the Mad Men pilot, Smoke Gets in Your Eye, which is a fantastic pilot, like really establishes Don Draper. And I think the only reason I didn't put it on the list was because I do feel a tiny little bit that it is a little bit detached from the rest of the season, because it was actually filmed a year before the rest of the season was filmed. And so they hadn't quite established all of the characters 100%. You know, Mad Men is such a great show, just in general, just brilliant TV, one of my favorite shows ever. And so that pilot almost made the list. So those are my honorable mentions, just missed out because of little factors here and there.
I think I considered Mad Men quite strongly as well. That's a very good pilot, and that's definitely a show that sticks the landing as well. I mean, such a great finale, and one of my favorite final shots ever on TV, definitely, and just the connotations of it. And so this has been our really long video, top 10 pilots. So as always, we want to hear from you. We would like to know, what are your top 10 TV pilots, if you want to come up with a list or just list some of your favorites. Also, what did you think of our list? I mean, just thoughts on that in general. Like and subscribe as always. Share us out on social media. You can obviously support me on Patreon, patreon.com/borednow. Me and Rachel obviously do a variety of things. We review TV, sometimes we review horror movies. Thanks, guys, for listening. We'll see you soon. Actually, before I go, I will just prep you for next month's list, which will be, as voted for you, it will be top 10 horror kills. So that'll be the next list coming up next month. But thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.